BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
Hello, I'm Phil Goodlad, and this is the Scottish Football Podcast. All the news, all the views, all the analysis you could ever need. It's Thursday, the 7th of November. Here's what's on our agenda today.
We need a really big performance. It's now to confirm that in this game at a higher level against a better opponent to raise our level again.
Can Rangers ease the pressure and get a much-needed result away at Olympiacos? Also,
it goes into the edge of Spittle! 2-0! Hearts have doubled their leads! Blair Spittle this time with another belting strike into the top corner!
Hearts host Heidenheim, looking to make it 3 conference wins out of 3. We'll find out about the German club's fairy tale rise and why they could be grim opponents at Tynecastle.
Look them up on Wikipedia and they sound very, very small indeed and don't have anything like Hearts' history, but they are a dangerous and talented opponent and they're not to be disrespected.
The Scottish Football Podcast from BBC Sport Scotland.
Lots to discuss from a European perspective. I'm delighted to say that John Walker, the coach, analyst and host of Scots Abroad podcast and contributor to This Is Ibrox, is with us. John, morning to you.
Morning, Phil.
I don't think I owe you an apology, but a number of people who've come up to me since the last time we spoke on the podcast say that I owe you an apology for referring to you looking like a young Orson Welles. That was not meant as anything negative at all. I had somebody come up and he said, you called John Walker, who was referred to as that boy on the podcast, by the way. You called that boy on the podcast a young Orson Welles. I said, yes. He said, does he smoke cigars? I said, I don't know. He certainly didn't during the podcast. He says, does he have a big fat face? I said, no, he doesn't. He was like, so why does he look like Orson Welles? And I was like, he just does a young Orson Welles.
I have to disagree with the big fat face part. I mean, the diet is not going well for this year, Phil.
Listen, I was being polite because we might need you on again very soon. Listen, lots to speak to you about, not least, as I say, the next instalment, I guess you could call it, in the Philippe Clement watch, because we're at this stage where almost every game we get either the pressure ramped up on Clement or eased slightly. And currently, after booking their spot in the final of this season's League Cup, the pressure eased a bit after the Pataudry defeat. But what will happen in Olympiacos? We'll speak about that in a moment. First, though, quickly we'll run through the latest Scottish football headlines. A blow for Rangers tonight. They'll be without Tom Lawrence for their Europa League game away at Olympiacos. The midfielder expected to be out for up to 4 to 6 weeks. Hearts will need a very strong mentality to get the better of Bundesliga side Heidenheim and maintain their 100% record in the Conference League. So says head coach Neil Critchley. The Edinburgh side have struggled in the Premiership this season. They're currently second bottom, but they have beaten Dinamo Minsk and Omonia Nicosia in Europe's third-tier competition. And champion Celtic moved 2 points off the top of the Scottish Women's Premier League with a 5-goal thrashing of Queen's Park last night.
The Scottish Football Podcast from BBC Sport Scotland.
Right, let's get into it. Let's start in Greece. Rangers, they take on Olympiacos this evening. Tea time kickoff, 5:45, so get that one in the diary. It's live here on Radio Scotland. That's on digital online and on your smartphone. Both teams on 6 points after 3 games. John, was I right in teeing this up as the next instalment in the Philippe Clement pressure season?
I think that's what it is. I said to a couple of pals at halftime at Hampden, that's as toxic as I've felt at a Rangers game at Hampden, and I've sat through some dross at Hampden. So it does feel like he is only one bad result away from everyone turning again. I mean, I think there's a lot of people turned that will never turn back towards Clement. I think he could go on and win the League Cup against Celtic. He could make a stick of the Championship. He could progress in the Europa League and we would still be unhappy because there's fans that were a little bit spoiled with Gerrard and Gio, with the style of football, the way we played. It was you could understand what was happening, what we were trying. And I think you look across the city and Celtic, Postecoglou, Rodgers before that. Neil Lennon was the only real blip of a team that didn't have a recognised style, and Celtic kind of hounded out a club legend because they could identify that this wasn't what they had seen before. and they got the style back. And with that style became a process. With that process became signing better players, regaining the championship, regaining trebles, regaining League Cups, and now they're looking for the treble again. And they're, 11 points clear of Rangers already. So I think if you're 11 points behind Celtic 10 games into a season, there's going to be pressure in every game you play now.
Will playing in Europe tonight actually then help Rangers? They've been very good for a number of seasons now in going up against opposition that you would think on paper at least would be too strong for Rangers, and yet Rangers continually rip up that European script.
I actually think it's something we've seen in the Malmo game. Not so much Lyon, but Lyon were an absolute class side. They're one of the best teams in the Europa League this year. But we've seen it in Malmo. Teams that have a bit more of identity, a bit more style, want to play a bit more football against us can come a little bit unstuck. And our kind of, I think the Olympiacos coach called it vertical play. I would call it long ball. But direct long ball play might actually benefit us in Europe. And especially if you're actually missing the likes of Tom Lawrence, and I suspect Diomande will play in that role. You've got somebody with Diomande, Cherny, Bajrami, who have got real pace, driving up the pitch on counters. So I actually think Olympiacos, this could be a good break for Rangers. It could be somewhere I would expect us to go and get a positive result. I don't know what that positive result is, but yeah, I think it's a nice break. It's something that Philippe Clement's style can kind of come a little bit to fruition, and teams can come unstuck against it a little bit.
All the back pages focusing on the atmosphere, the intimidation. I wonder, though, if that might have a positive effect on Rangers in the sense that it will really be a backs-to-the-wall Rangers team that enter that cauldron and know that they have to be at their best to get something.
I mean, they were warmed up quite well at Hampden with the boos from their own fans, so it's not like it's not like Rangers have been playing in welcoming conditions at Ibrox. Like every player's a bad touch away from being like kind of groaned at. I agree.
John, I'm interrupting you, and I hate when I do that, and I apologise. But do you need to look at yourself as a group of fans booing your team at Hampden like that?
I don't think so. I don't mind the booing at half time. One of the things that I have probably got better at with age, I try and control myself during the gameplay with players. That if players take a bad touch or play the wrong pass, I tend not to get on top of players whilst they're actually playing. But I think at interval breaks, where half time and full time, where you're disappointing, you need to relay that. You can't just sit there and be accepting of it. I know Rangers players know that, but you do get that kind of feeling of you deserve to hear this because you deserve to get our feedback, because we don't ever really get a chance outside of this platform to give you feedback, because although players have social media, most of them are run by their agents or management clubs. So the only real feedback we get to give you is that. And I don't think there'd be a Rangers player, coaching staff or anyone that thought Saturday was acceptable. Sunday was acceptable. I do, however, think that the groaning and moaning is something that probably needs to be tried to reel back a little bit, especially at Ibrox. Should be a kind of positive atmosphere and where we're kind of supporting players.
What do you expect tonight from your captain, James Tavernier? He was hauled off in the second half of their win against Motherwell midway through that second half. Is James Tavernier's position in the starting 11 tonight under threat?
I think so. I really do. I think everyone wants to go look at my Twitter. I have been the biggest James Tavernier cheerleader against all the noise in the past 8 years. I think he's been our most consistent player. Whatever joke you want to make there, which side that's on, I think he's been a tremendous servant. He's been my favourite player of the last decade at Rangers, without a shadow of a doubt. But for me, there is definitely an ageing factor with James Tavernier now. We've seen it with Duke. I've seen it in Malmo with players going past him. He looks like somebody that's about to hit 33, and not many fullbacks hit their peak. He's 5 years behind his peak.
But has that happened since the summer? Has that now been apparent in the last 2 or 3 months, that this is a player who's reaching the end physically of playing at this level? Or should this not have been seen? If you believe that's the case, would there not be somebody at Rangers going, well, no, he's still got another year, everything's fine?
I think the style of play is affecting him a little bit, because there's not the kind of pattern build-up for him to go past a winger. It's more direct, get up the pitch, be in the areas. And I think what you're seeing a lot from Tavernier is he definitely doesn't have the pace to get up and down 90 yards to then get back 90 yards, which is a lot of what Diomandi's getting caught out doing that fans don't see. As with the direct play, you've got people who are just doing doggies 80 yards up and down. It'll have more of an effect than a 32-year-old fullback who has played a ridiculous number of games over his career, and especially for us. For me, I think there's nobody that can disagree that there was a massive improvement when Dujon Sterling came on Sunday at right back. Pace, athleticism, willingness just to run off and give Czerny the line himself. Whereas I think because there's been so much reliance on Tavernier to be wide and deliver crosses and get the assists, it doesn't necessarily maybe know how to give that up. When you've got a right winger like Czerny who can create all day long, you kind of just want to leave him. I would expect that Dujon Sterling starts tonight, and I would be very surprised if he doesn't.
One final thing. So that then your view of what will happen. I mean, Rangers to drop their captain for an away European game, that's a massive statement.
I would say so, but a lot of Olympiacos' play does tend to be with Velde, Gelson Martins and El Kaibe up front. The front three, really pacey, direct. I wouldn't imagine you play James Tavernier just because you want James Tavernier there. I'd imagine you play Dujon Sterling because you're worried about the impact of Christopher Velde or Gelson Martins.
Finally, will Rangers get something tonight, do you believe?
I think they will. I think they can get a draw in Olympiacos. Again, I think the atmosphere will be a factor for a little bit while, but I honestly think playing away at Olympiacos is probably more pleasant for players than playing at home at Ibrox just now.
Moving on from Greece to Gorgie, it's Hearts against Heidenheim, both sides with 2 wins from 2 Conference League games going into this. To find out more about the visitors, because they're a real fairy tale involving what we would traditionally call German minnows, but they've just moved up the leagues over the last few years to now be in European competition. To find out more, my colleague Amy Canavan's been speaking to the Athletics German football correspondent, Seb Stafford-Bloor.
Seb, back on the podcast. Thank you very much once again. Not speaking of as familiar a side as we did the other day regarding RB Leipzig, but who are Heidenheim?
So last season, Heidenheim played in the Bundesliga for the first time in their history, and they're coached by Frank Schmidt, who is the longest-serving permanent head coach in German football. And to measure and describe his achievement, he became head coach in 2008. Which time Heidenheim were playing in the 5th tier of German football. And what happened since, it's no melodrama to describe it as a miracle. They're really a club without budget. They're a club who, for a long time, seemed like they would forever play in the Zweite Bundesliga, 2nd tier of German football. They were kind of just stuck there. They didn't have the budget to go up, but they were well coached enough to stay there. And they had this amazing promotion moment. They had to beat Regensburg on the last day of the season before last to go up. And heading into injury time, they were still losing. And they scored twice in 11 minutes and prevented Hamburg, obviously former European champions Hamburg, from going up. And everything since then has been kind of miraculous. Came up in their first season, technically built on being very, very resilient without the ball, but also counterattacking to a really high standard, loads of energy. Frank Schmidt demands an awful lot, big physical price from his players. And amazingly, despite having not just the lowest budget in the Bundesliga, but by far the lowest budget in the Bundesliga, their wage bill was fractions of teams like Freiburg, Borussia Mönchengladbach, let alone teams like Leverkusen, Dortmund, Bayern Munich, with whom they have no comparison whatsoever. Managed to qualify for the Conference League, play in Europe for the first time in their history. One thing over the summer, as was kind of inevitable because of how well they performed, they lost a lot of key performers. So Tim Kleindienst, who is their beanpole centre forward, he was sold to Gladbach. Jan-Niki Bester, who was, I think, such a key part of their counter-attack, such a direct player, but also probably one of the best set-piece takers in the Bundesliga. Their set-piece was very, very good and were really the bedrock of their progress and their ability to survive, kind of helped them build the confidence to then go forward and start to kind of feel like a Bundesliga team. So he was very, very important. He was sold to Benfica. Erin Dingchi was only on loan from Werder Bremen, and at the end of the season, he left and then was sold to Freiburg. So he's gone. So you got 3 really, really core pieces. And I wouldn't say they're equal of what they were last season, but they've got some very, very interesting players. Probably chief amongst them is Paul Vanna, who is, he's on loan from Bayern Munich, and he's still a teenager, and this is really his first season of senior football as a proper regular. But people at Bayern Munich, I mean, hold him in incredibly high regard. They see him as potentially having the ability to be a sort of a next Florian Wirtz, that kind of caliber of player. He is a golden child of German football, and someone definitely to watch out for in that team.
You've got me scared, Seb. You've got me scared. It's an incredible story, and perhaps one that it's not really been translated as well across here as perhaps it should have been, because that is very much fairy tale stuff. I think you sort of mentioned that there may, well, given the players that they've lost in the summer, but they're maybe struggling with that second season syndrome almost. But when you look at their start in the Conference League, is that where this side sort of star when there is no pressure? It's effectively free hits because they're doing something that's never been done before.
I don't know if free hit is the word to describe it. I mean, I've spent some time with Frank Schmidt, and he's a wonderful human being. Like, he's the kind of guy that you meet and you think, God, I kind of wish you were my uncle.
Go out for a pint.
Yeah, well, the first time I met him, we sat there and he was showing me pictures of his dogs and his horse, and like he was talking about sort of his experience growing up in the area and all those kind of things. But behind that is quite an exacting coach and someone who demands very, very high standards. And sort of, I don't think he would allow that group of players to think of it as a free hit. To him, the Conference League is, no, we're not just having a day out. We want to go and throw some punches while we're here. And that will be very much the mentality. I think their start in the Conference League shows they are just a really well-coached team. And yes, we talked about some of the players they lost, but their building blocks, so their defense, their goalkeeper, their patterns without the ball, their resilience defensively, that is all still in place, still all intact. And so kind of the base of the side hasn't really changed. And they're not going to be the kind of team that's just sort of going around Europe filling their Instagram accounts at all. There's a real chip on their shoulder mentality at Heidenheim, because I won't bore you with the individual stories, but there are a lot of players there who were told they were not good enough elsewhere. And whenever you have that, and whenever you have a coach who's able to harness it, it's an incredibly powerful thing. And we all know this because it happens in every league. And, you know, there's examples all over Europe. Of course, there are. Heidenheim just happened to be the best German example of it. And yeah, it feels like Frank Schmidt has done a really, really good job in channeling a lot of that stuff. And we talked about Jan-Nicky Beste, you know, moving to Benfica for nearly 10 million euros last summer. He was told he wasn't good enough to play for Werder Bremen for a while. He was too small, not good enough. You know, so there are all those stories there, and they're a lovely story, actually, as a collective. If you ever get the chance to go there, it's not the easiest place to get to by train, but the whole town is under this castle, a Schloss, and they play in the Voigt Arena, which is the highest point in the Bundesliga. And I've walked it, and I can tell you, me and my 40-year-old lungs will tell you, it's no joke. It's not quite altitude, but you know, you have to be, you know, if your legs have seen better days, then you might have to stop halfway up there.
I might just miss that one out and take your word for it. You said that Frank Schmidt's been there for 15 years plus. But when you hear of the story, how have they managed to keep a hold of him? Because that's the sort of manager, the coach, that the way that he's obviously channeling his philosophy into his side, that many clubs would go, yep, I want him, bring him here. Yeah,
it's interesting. When you ask him about this, what he says is, what you have to remember is that, yes, while he's been there since 2008, he actually played for the club before, but also a lot of the people who were at the club at the start of the journey, they're still there. Like, I think the goalkeeping coach has been there for even longer than Frank Schmidt. The president has been there since the 90s. The president was at one point a volunteer. So I think that's what keeps him there. And also that the club is kind of built around him. If we think about, for instance, what used to be the case in British football with long-serving head coaches, where the club becomes really them, you know, designed around their image, and they have complete control, and they sort of, the club grows up around a singular person. That's Heidenheim. And mixed in with, he is a local person. You know, his mother, when Frank Schmidt was growing up, his mother worked for the Steiff factory, which makes the soft toys, which is, you know, local. So this is someone with a lot of ties to the area, someone who has no real incentive to leave and seems very, very content with life. Like I think one of the things that you get when you move to bigger clubs, particularly in Germany, is you have to start dealing with, you know, sporting directors, board members for sport, politics. Whereas at Heidenheim, he's just the coach. In big capital letters, he's the coach, but he is the coach. And it's quite an uncomplicated club in that sense. And I think also if you spend time listening to his pride about what the club has become. So if you can walk around their ground and you can see the original grandstand and how the stadium has quite literally grown up around it. It used to be a singular grandstand and then not quite running track, but almost like, a pitch separated from supporters by metal railings. It was really just that. And so when you look at what he's been able to create, I think that's a hard thing to walk away from. Very, very difficult.
The case has been sold to me, absolutely. And I kind of wish that the Conference League gods allowed for Hearts to be travelling out to Heidenheim, because it certainly sounds a fantastic experience. But, Gorgie and Tynecastle matches it completely. How do they travel? How can Hearts get some joy against them at home? Because it does sound like it would be a very different test if it was in Heidenheim.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I don't think anybody in the Bundesliga, let alone me, has really cracked the Heidenheim code. You mentioned earlier that they haven't started that well this season. Over last weekend, they were the first team to be beaten by Holstein-Kiel. Holstein-Kiel, who are kind of Heidenheim in a sense, because they are playing in the Bundesliga for the first time in their history, and this was their first victory at home. And it was a little bit sloppy. Have we been having this conversation last week? I'd have said the thing you have to avoid with Heidenheim is just arrowing crosses into their box. So Hearts cannot just set up and just sling the ball towards the back post and hope for the best, because Heidenheim are really well built to avoid those kind of things. I think it's mandatory that obviously they defend really well from set pieces. But that Holstein-Kiel game, yeah, they lost to a header. They lost to a header that they really should have defended better. So maybe there's a slipping standard there. I think the teams that beat Heidenheim, they're more intricate, they're more imaginative, they play original football, they don't get sucked into, Heidenheim will be quite deep, I'd imagine. They don't get sucked into just kind of chucking balls forward and hoping they'll beat themselves, because they won't beat themselves. And so that's the thing to avoid. I think also anytime Hearts lose the ball, that is something to be very, very careful of. So this is excuse the phrase, but this is a night for solid rest defence and for responsible attacking and for being a little bit respectful of what Heidenheim are, despite the fact that, look them up on Wikipedia and they sound very, very small indeed and don't have anything like Hearts' history, but they are a dangerous and talented opponent, and they're not to be disrespected.
The Scottish Football Podcast from BBC Sport Scotland.
John, just to pick you up on Hearts and Heidenheim, we heard there from Amy and from Seb Stafford-Bloor. It's almost refreshing to hear a footballing fairy tale like what we've heard from the Germans that will come to Tynecastle tonight.
Yeah, I think it's some good stories, because I think a lot of the kind of fairy tale stories we've heard across Europe have kind of been money led a lot of the time. I think it's like teams that get decent investment, most of them linked to the City Group, to be honest, that you kind of tend to see that. So no, it is nice. I think that is like on the list of the Conference League games, I think that's the one that properly stands out. I think a lot of players say Hearts to me is the best away ground. If you're outside, if you're the Old Firm and you want to go as an Old Firm fan to one of those grounds, Hearts is the best ground. And I do remember like 15 years ago, Hearts in Europe, it was absolutely rocking. It was super loud. I think tonight's going to be one of the special nights. I think the only problem they've got is this Heidenheim team. I've got multiple different ways of playing and can really, I'm sure that's been covered, can really shock you in the counter-attack. And I think the way that I've seen Critchley's team set up, it could be a bit of a counter-attacking masterclass.
Given your background in football coaching, what have you made of Neil Critchley's start and style at Hearts?
I like him. I like him from what I've seen so far, because I feel like I've seen little different things just from the way that he got the result against St Johnstone. I think they let Simo Valakari, because I do think St Johnstone are putting on a bit of a show and how you can coach and dominate the ball. But I think Hearts were quite comfortable not having the ball and got the result. And then I think on the Hibs game, I think for large parts they dominated that game without creating too much. I do like the way he plays the two wide players and brings them in to kind of create a box four. I think it's just trying to judge how the fullbacks get up and support that, so you're not kind of trapped with no width in the game. But I think Neil Critchley's probably somebody that's worked at not really a higher level in Scottish football, but has experienced a higher level of coaching, and you can see that a little bit.
What do you think Hearts will do tonight?
I think it'll be tight, but I do think Heidenheim might walk away with 3 points with a goal in. I think it'll be 2-1.
If you have any complaints for John Walker about suggesting that Rangers will win tonight and a non-Old Firm team will lose, you can indeed write to us here at BBC Scotland. John, we'll leave it there. My producer is shouting in my ear that we have to wrap this up, which is a shame because I wanted to go through Orson Welles' best films, of which Transformers, the original movie from 1985, is the best of the lot. But we'll leave it there for another time. John Walker, thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning. Thanks also to Seb Stafford-Bloor for giving us the lowdown on the latest footballing fairy tale from Germany. Remember Sports Sound tonight from 5 o'clock on digital, online and on your smartphone. We'll cover both matches. Rangers at Olympiacos, Hearts at home to Heidenheim. Keep it Radio Scotland for all your football needs. And we'll have a special Q&A episode next week with our very own Chief Sports Writer Tom English. He'll be on hand to answer your questions. No subject off the table, so I'm told. So, Scottish football at bbc.co.uk to get your questions in for that one. For now, though, I'm going to leave you by giving you a simple piece of advice. Enjoy the beautiful game, and we'll speak again soon.
This is the shocking moment English football has been dreading.
My name is Moses Swabu, and I used to be a professional footballer. But then I got in deep with organised crime and became a match fixer operating in the English League.
A match-fixing investigator has highlighted 2 matches he says appear to have suspicious betting patterns.
How honest are you going to be with me?
This is 100%. Join me for Sports Strangest Crimes presents Confessions of a Match Fixer. Listen on BBC Sounds.